the word experts is something that I think, Stacy, that is just so like overblown. Like, what does that mean? Am I only an expert if I have certain credentials? Who determines that? And from my perspective, I often feel that experts aren't always seeking the truth. They're seeking control. They're seeking anchoring and groupthink, often based on decades ago, their education. And I look at it from the perspective of experts are often wrong. I look at the economy, I look at inflation, I look at geopolitics, I look at the perception of experts on wars and investing and even poker, being that I'm a little bit of a poker, quote unquote. They rarely, here's the key point, Stacy. I don't think they often pay the price for being wrong. It's me or it's the client that does.
Well, I think expert, the capacity and the capability of doing things at a high precision level, with, reduction of error is really important. And we often need experts to foster our own growth and development, whether it's professors or mechanics or surgeons or we're learning artists. So the concept of subjective and objective and expert, I don't know, you're speaking about a lot of different aspects of it, but I think it's really the openness and the curiosity of constantly learning something new. I'm thinking about the expert of a surgeon. There's a TED Talk. I'm sorry, I don't remember the presenter's name, but he's a heart surgeon. And he's in the studio or the stadium, and his coach is watching from above him do surgery. And later, the coach says to the surgeon, it was a 2-hour surgery. Halfway through it, your arm dropped and you had less control over the instruments. You leaned forward and you cut off some of the light that was aiming at the body. And so these were coaching tips or coaching observations for an expert. So I think experts have to be open to coaching. You know that in every field, there's radical improvements and innovations. So expert isn't...
Which often don't come from experts.
Well, innovation, that's right. But experts need to be open to growth and change and innovation.
Well,
and I think an expert is not a static position. So
but experts are often not open to the things that you know. And from my perspective, especially if they're a couple of decades in, their age, their past successes, accolades, and kudos to them. And then I look at kind of maybe my big three, their ego, because of what I just described, their, to some degree, ignorance. I'm too busy. I know enough already. I don't need to know new things. Everything is exactly the same as it was 10, 20, 30 years ago, and partially due to fear. So I agree with you on the broad concept. If the word expert means someone who's open-minded and doesn't let ego, ignorance, or fear get in the way. But I often think more than half the time, most of them do.
Well, I think we don't want to confuse the term expert with hubris. And I think Jim Collins writes a phenomenal 2 books that are really go hand in hand, very complementary. One book he writes is all about successful leadership, which is good to great. And then he writes another book that's called How the Mighty Fall. And that's all about the egotistical nature of leaders when they are in decline. And it starts with hubris. So I guess I would just say, you can do the right thing in the right way. You could be an expert in the right way and be open to learning and growth and development, and be humble. Or you could do expertise in the wrong way. You could be closed and fearful and turf, protectors of turf, and eventually it will lead into demise. So,
and maybe a follow-up question that maybe I should have started with is, what would be a definition within the confines of what we're talking about of the word expert? What does that mean to you?
It's probably a combination of what we're just talking about: training, experience, the ability to learn new things, and the ability to collaborate with others to continue to sharpen your skills. So I think an expert is not a stagnant position. An expert is a person who's constantly learning, but has probably reached over the course of their career certain milestones that are required to know a topic in an expert way, so that, yeah, you can do it with precision.
Because I look at things from more of a financial lens and we have a different perspective there. And you gave the example of a doctor where I agree with you. If I'm having brain surgery, I don't want a creative, high IQ artist who's awesome, by the way, but what do they know? What skills have they acquired and what's their experiences on something where it's life or death? So I do think some things mathematical and others that verbiage, and I'm still a little bit careful about using the word expert because I don't think many of them, I don't think many people have the empathy, the hubris, and that they're willing to, bury me in the white belt, even though I don't know, I think I have some pretty good skills on family offices. I'm experienced. I think experience could be woefully overrated, but there are some times where it could be valuable. But the example I was kind of going to give is in the world of economics, macroeconomic, well, kind of the same thing, but a little different. Geopolitics and investing, experience is not always to benefit because arguably it allows you to anchor, it allows you to have certain biases. And I hear too many people that what they learned a decade, 2, 3, 4, or 5 ago in school, and again, they had some successes, they don't adapt. And I look at Bitcoin from an investing perspective. I look at now the world of AI and simply even the world of warfare, how it's becoming so much more technological, robotics, and certainly drones, and how the system, the bureaucratic system that looks to protect itself in so many different ways is not an adaptive enough mechanism. Using the seam to lead, it becomes more fragile than anti-fragile.
Those are really super thoughts, Angelo. And adaptive is obviously a really important aspect of expertise and subject matter, and research, and constantly evolving your thinking and stepping away from groupthink. I think that's another concept in the expert space where you get involved in groupthink, and people rely on you for certain expertise and they don't do the work themselves. I think that's another thing that is a kind of a catch-22, is you look to an expert so that you don't have to do that work or that study yourself. But you also said something I thought was really important, which has to do with not with the self-servingness, the self-interest of an expert, or kind of land grabbing. And I would say that it's a great entry into a book that I co-authored with 3 other authors called The Sixth Level, Capitalize on the Power of Women's Psychology for Sustainable Leadership, and the 4 core differentiators that are essentially sourced and born from women's psychology, which are not currently understood or used today because it's been left out of the research, would really impact the effectiveness of leaders in expert positions. For example, mutuality, ingenuity, justness, and intrinsic motivation are all aspects of psychology and relationships that require emotional reciprocity. And so when we think about experts, and when we think about advising each other, when we think about adapting to constant change, and often dangerous change, the farther away humanity is from the actions that we're taking, whether it's drones or the things that you were describing with regard to technology and AI, the more we're removed, the less empathic we are, the less concerned we are with outcomes, right? And being concerned with outcomes is relevant to being an expert, because if you're not staying current, if you're not evolving, then the outcomes will be in decline. And again, back to the 6th level, when we are operating at the 6th level and we're not competing, command and control, dominance, and turf battles and self-interest, when we are engaged in the interests of others, I think we naturally get benefit for all. And I think that's the core purpose.
I'd like to follow up on that. It changes from the expert part, but we did spend 5 or 6 minutes on that. You did bring up another subject that I think I'm the only person in the family office community that brings up. More so last year, I had multiple guests on. You mentioned certain psychological traits, perhaps in business and finance, of women. And then you did mention, you didn't use the word men when you said dominance and self interest, but I'm going to throw words in your mouth that it was a little implied. And I don't mean that from a negative perspective. One, and we may be getting a little down an interesting road here. If you believe in evolutionary psychology, the work of Dr. David Buss and so many others, but a lot of them admittingly go back decades ago, there is obviously also biological differences between male and female, primarily related to hormones. So testosterone is going to be a driver for uh, impetus for taking risk. And sometimes those risks can play out wonderfully, but also sometimes they could really burn you in the butt. In your experiences in universities and working with entrepreneurs and families of all types, and I know this goes against the grain of people that may be more left leaning, but do you agree that there is differences that are less so cultural, some of it, but more so biological with male and female?
Yeah, of course.
Well, most people with your background, if I could talk openly, they would misdirect my question because I don't want to directly answer that.
It would be silly to say that we're the same. I mean, um, in a very simple way, when we gather together as men and women often sit together and men often sit together. I mean, we gravitate to the people who are similar to us and engage in conversations and interesting topics that we find interesting. I mean, even on very superficial ways, we see the differences that women and men gravitate to naturally. So I guess my main point, Angelo, is yes, men and women are different.
Yes, I think it's pretty obvious and a no brainer, but I think in today's world, I'm often not used to hearing guests that may have a little different perspective, cultural background, and experiences and credentials that you have that would state that. Now, let's bring it back a little bit more into the family business and family office. Generally, let's be honest, a lot of this has been somewhat male driven, especially if I go out of the West and I go to other parts of the world where often it's the first-born male child that is almost given the reins, let me use that word, of a family business enterprise. In my world, arguably the family office. And I don't know, I can make the argument maybe it really hasn't played out that well. Now, Dennis Jaffe and Jim Grumman believe somewhat debunked the theory of shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, just because that's built on a flawed study, but just because they did other research that may show somewhat differently doesn't necessarily mean that theirs is inclusive enough and correct. And any biases, I don't know. And I think they're both friends of mine for 2 decades. And I would love to invite them on the show. But I do sometimes sense a little bit of, well, what I said earlier about the expert class that really doesn't want to be challenged on their ideas. Do you believe, after that long winded buildup, that family enterprises would benefit from more diversity of thought and opinion within the family? But then how do they do that and how do they reach a final conclusion?
So many things, Angelo, you've got me thinking about. I think actually you've landed on the easiest question, the easiest point to address. So I'm just going to address that. Um, so yes, in fact, we do have a system that we live in that's oriented towards command and control, that's oriented towards dominance, that's oriented towards competition, winners and losers. that's oriented, let's just say that that makes some characteristics more preferred than other human characteristics. These create biases and a hierarchy of who's more important and who's less important. Can I say that? Can we say that, Angelo? Can I say that and move on to the next point?
Yes.
Okay. So, so in this world that we live in, that's oriented to dominance, one of the ways we got here is a lot of studies that were done in any field. All traditional research and all traditional institutions and disciplines are oriented towards men's lens, simply because, or ironically because, they were studied. The researchers were men, and the subjects were men. And those findings were ultimately generalized to the rest of the population. And when those research and findings were generalized to the rest of the population became a deviation to the norm. So if we just want to look at gender, for example, or women and men specifically, for example, women are a deviation to the norm. That makes it very difficult to give women's lens credibility or voice or recognition or influence in the larger system. So are we good with that?
My only little pushback on that, well, maybe a couple, would be, since the universities are turning out quote unquote people with so-called credentials and acquiring skills, the university system for decades, and you were in it and a part of it, and if I could challenge you, you may not want to admit it, they have been heavily skewed towards issues relative to women versus men. If I wanted to do a research study on why men are 90% of them are in jail for violent crimes relative to women, why they're committing suicide at a much higher rate, why they're homeless, no one cares about any of those things. They're bypassed. Now, was it extremely the other way around pre the mid 70s? Probably. Was that fair? Absolutely not. So that would be a little bit of my pushback, but let me learn from your answer.
Okay, I appreciate the pushback. Let me see if I can share this other piece to the story. First of all, it's very sad that anybody's suffering is ignored or less important than somebody else's suffering. And that's the strange, or that is the outcome of a dominant society, a system that prefers or preferences one group over another.
Yeah, but it sounds like you're, and I know this sounds lofty, but you're pushing for an egalitarian society and system.
Okay,
where does that work? Where's the proof?
Okay, so let me build up to that one. You're a little bit ahead of me. So let me build up to that, because, for example, many of us know the story written by Shel Silverstein. It's a child's story, children's book. It's called The Giving Tree.
It is awesome. Of course. I read it a million times.
And in the story of The Giving Tree, for those of you who have not read it, a little boy grows up in a meadow, and he grows up and he befriends this big, beautiful oak tree, and he plays on this tree, and he climbs her branches, and he uses the branches for sticks, and he plays the drums, and he eats it's not an oak tree, it's an apple tree, I apologize, and he eats the apples from her branches, and they become great friends. And then as he grows up, he goes out into the world, and he leaves the tree, and he finds glorious things in the world. When he returns to the tree, he cuts down her branches because he wants a boat. He wants to build a boat to travel the seas. So he takes down her branches and he travels the trees. When he comes back to her, he wants a house. So he cuts down her trunk and he builds a house. And someday he comes back, he's an old man, and he comes back, and all that's left of the tree is the stump. Now, the story is perceived as a story of giving, but I'm wondering if it's a story of stealing. And I'm wondering what's left for her and what's left for the next generation. It's a story of self-interest. It's a story of not being concerned
Do you
with
think
the
that
needs of others.
And I read the book to my son and others, to classrooms. It almost always seems to bring a little bit of a tear or some emotions to my eye. He's a wonderful writer. There's nuances behind his background, but we don't have to get too into detail. But here's my question to you, and pardon me if I'm reading it the wrong way. Would that be different in your perspective if the human character wasn't a young boy into an old man, but was a young woman into an older woman, or that would never happen from the perspective of a female?
Well, the story is really about taking, without considering the needs of the tree or the other. So I want to go back to this point that psychology is really, or has been, oriented towards the self. In 1971, Jean Baker Miller and other colleagues at Wellesley College at the Stone Center studied women's psychology from the lens of women for the first time ever. And what they discovered was women have a sixth level of orientation, a sixth level of psychological development, where Maslow and Kohlberg and Piaget and Freud stopped at self-interest or self-actualization, autonomy, individuation, and separation. Women progressed to a sixth level of development that was self and other, that instead of stopping at self-actualization to reach my own potential, women's development goes to learning and engaging and being connected to others. And that's the lesson that really society and really the species has not been learning from women, because women have not been invited to teach the species this psychological level of development.
Well,
So Angelo,
mhm,
we
mhm.
as a species are deficient in our orientation to other. We have locked ourselves into a belief system that's oriented towards self, self-interest, self-potential, and self-reward. And we have been depleted of empathy, of mutuality, which is two-way empathy, of solutions that solve the problem, not just for myself, but for others. So mutuality is the ability to have mutually rewarding relationships. This is from women's psychology. Ingenuity is the ability to solve complex problems with novel solutions to serve the interests of many. Currently, the way we make decisions is based on precedent, but precedent only works for a short period of time for a small interest group. Over time, like families and generations and branches of families and in-laws that come in, precedent doesn't work when your system is growing and evolving. You need novel solutions. And since we're biased to precedent and not novel solutions, we contort our reality. We narrow our options. The third is justness. Justness, women are the first victims of injustice. So when we think about women helping define justness in society, it's kind of the higher level, right? Just like we would not deter the Olympians from going to the highest level of their performance, we really need to go to the highest level of justness. Otherwise, we devolve into dominance and there's imbalance. So we need women to help set a standard of justness that we all live up to, so we don't have more men in prisons, so we don't have more men killing themselves, so we don't have men in domestic violence situations, that the system serves everyone, not just a few. And then the fourth is intrinsic motivation. And essentially, that's the willingness to go above and beyond my own self-interest to serve the interests of others. And when we all come into a community with the interest of serving others, we don't have to worry about our interests not being met, because we have a community of people who are looking out for our best interests. So
Yeah,
these are four.
Please continue.
No, those are four core differentiators based on emotional reciprocity that lead to an environment and to a culture that's oriented to the ethic of care, not towards dominance.
The role of nurturing and empathy and value in community, you are correct. And those are some things where we could make the debate that women are broadly going to be stronger at, but it needs.
But we can all learn.
Well,
It's
maybe
not.
yes and no, because of biological differences, and that's the nuance in the world. I don't believe what you're saying is necessarily true, but there are some roads you're going down that do cause me to think, and we do need to consider. You mentioned 1971 and some of the changing, and that goes into several things that happened, including since 1965 and onwards. Would you agree that the vast majority, and I mean vast majority, like probably easily 80% plus of people now in the field of sociology and psychology are women, younger women? Men are not going into those roles. Men are often not going into teaching roles, especially more K-8. And I think that skews the perspective. When you quell some of the things that you spoke about, that implies that there's toxic masculinity. Now, there's toxic people that could be male and female. And this is the whole challenge that I see in America and I see in the West. And maybe I look at it from a lens of a 60-year-old man of Italian and Latino heritage. Maybe I'm a little outdated. But I look at some of the things that you're talking about, and I agree with some of them. But I think they are looked at through a lens that is a little bit one-sided. And there is an other side of that coin and a reverse side of that story where over the last couple of decades, things have shifted far more in one direction than another.
Well, first of all, there is current research. One of the leading experts in men's psychology and boys' psychology is Niobe Way, and she's out of NYC, New York, NYC University, New York University, whatever it is. And she is really surfacing the issues of alienation and isolation and this false sense of masculinity, limited sense of masculinity that has limited boys from learning and wanting to learn. I think you're speaking about a bias that is a little bit of a contradiction, Angela, because you say, why are so many men in prison? Why are more men than women killing themselves? Why are more men than women, in these circumstances? And I think
because we have a massive burden of performance as a male.
I think exactly.
And we're driven by testosterone. It's biological with a little bit of cultural.
Oh, you're destined. You have this biological destiny that you're speaking about, and it's so primitive in your thinking. We're thinking.
I make my own choices, but I'm driven by biological differences between the male and the female, and henceforth, that greater testosterone could cause me to do some great things. The skyscrapers who built the skyscrapers, the roads, who's done the heavy lifting, who's fought wars and sacrificed. When there's violent men, and there certainly is enough of them, who fights them back? Men that have the capacity for violence, but want to do good for their family, for community, and for what they serve.
Okay, here's my challenge to you. I'm not inclined to get into this particular debate because I think we are making a lot of huge generalizations, and what we're missing is that we're living in a system, a reality that you're buying into, that this is the natural order of things, that patriarchy or a system of dominance that
everything is downstream from genetics.
that harms everyone. Well, you're saying if it's based on genetics, then I think perhaps women's genetics would prefer a different system. So unless we're working collectively and collaboratively, we are complementary. So again,
yes.
The system of patriarchy creates a forced dichotomy. It puts women and men in this example as opposite. And when you perform as opposites, you are antagonistic. We are actually taught not to get along, yet we have all of these systems that require us to be in relationships with each other. Angela, there's just too many contradictions in what we're talking about to say this is the natural order of things. And then for you just to narrow it down or to play it out as testosterone. I mean, women have more testosterone in our bodies than estrogen or progesterone. It's just not as much
Yes, but
testosterone as
men have
men do.
17 times the level of testosterone to the
But if
average
we were
female.
okay, so what we're also talking about is the how we order our lives. So if you say men are more inclined to do these hellacious things in war and otherwise, why wouldn't we create a system that inhibited that rather than? And I'm not suggesting that we inhibit anything. I'm suggesting that we develop a system that is more oriented towards the needs of the whole rather than the needs of the individual. And we can craft that society. So I just think what you're saying is if it's ugly, then why don't we craft something that works better for everyone?
At best, it sounds egalitarian, which I know from afar looks good.
I don't think
And
it
if I
sounds
dig a little,
egalitarian. I think you think it sounds idealistic, and you're
I mean,
not willing.
to me, it may sound a little socialistic, but that's from my perspective. Maybe one
No,
final
no, no. We're
question.
not even talking about economics. We're talking about relationships, Angelo. We're talking about taking care of community. I mean, let's just go back to what we're really supposed to be talking about, which is family, multi-generational families of wealth and family offices. And these are communities that actually have failed because of this antagonism. What I'm saying is that we do need more of a relational focus so that the very expectation that these high net worth families have is that they can have continuity without disrepair and without dysfunction. They want continuity with harmony, as Rich Walkowitz says, with enduring family harmony. That's what they're asking for. That's what makes me so popular today, is because everybody thinks that this devolving into control and divisiveness and this family and that distribution strategy and that distribution strategy, they don't want that division anymore. They want tools that don't divide. They want tools that connect. And that's what that is the highest level of social order, and families are asking for it. They don't want what you're saying, this natural order of things is to decline and devolve into wars and control and animosity and hubris. And that's how we started the conversation. You said experts are hubris and egotistical, and you don't like that. Well, that's what this whole warring system is hubris and egotistical. And it's not the natural order of things.
An indirect final question on the subject, and it does in its own way segue into what we're going to follow through. And of course, this applies to men as well, but I think there is a different, I mean, I'm 60 years old. I've started businesses, I've sold businesses, I've worked in Fortune 500 companies. I have failed miserably multiple times, but I rise up, I'm resilient, and I've had some level of successes. Hopefully, for me, they'll continue. Do women always encourage and want other women to succeed? What I mean by that is I'll bring up the WNBA. I saw Caitlin Clark come into the WNBA. I saw attendance, when I say skyrocket, whoa, do I mean skyrocket, eyeballs. In other words, it's good for the league, which has never made money in 27 years. Finally, now they may be getting the attendance that's going to drive TV contracts, that's going to drive salaries for everyone. And kudos, I'm actually really enjoying the WNBA. And honestly, I never thought I would have said that. It opened my eyes to other incredible players and a level of play that I'm really enjoying in some ways, honestly, more than the men's game. But I also have to face reality. She got a lot of blowback from women in the league, less so spectators. And I feel there was a little bit of a resentment. And I think some of those, and I don't know, maybe I will go back to genetics and biology. Why is that the case? Or am I seeing something that's a mirage that I want to see, but is not a reality?
Well, I mean, I think there's a social media frenzy that people really like to, create drama. So I don't think there's a unique, drama of women against women that doesn't exist in other social, in social media that pits men against men. I mean, I don't I think that there is there's, what is it called? Like hating. There's this hater mentality in social media. So I think that gets blown up. There may be just as many or more circumstances where you see women hugging or supporting each other that doesn't get on social media. So I don't know if we're just seeing bias, but I would say more broadly, it's a good question, because sometimes in these conversations, women will say women are our own worst enemy. And, that's it's a super sad commentary. I would say men are men's biggest enemy. So what I would say is that we live in a system that contorts our best self. We are really disincented to be our best selves because we really have to outdo one another in this system of winning and losing. So I would say that in a system of dominance or patriarchy, where there is a hierarchy of who is more important than others, we learn that whether we're women or not. So even if we have an orientation, even if men have an orientation to being more sixth level thinkers, right? Sixth level leaders with this mutual reciprocity and emotional reciprocity, we still as a society default to dominance. And that's and that's what happens. We're all vulnerable and victim to a system that causes us and forces us to compete with one another.
Yeah, I mean, the word victim is not one that just like I don't really like the word expert. Weak people think the world is against them. Strong people don't care if it is. But a question,
well, there is such a thing as being a victim. There is such a thing. You can
is
be a
that
victim
perspective
of a crime.
of is you feeling like a victim even when you're correct? Is that going to be a positive thing for you to move forward and be successful?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Well, that's
I'm a victim. I grew up in a broken welfare home. I'm half minority, being Latino and Puerto Rican.
Right.
I look different in today's family office world.
Yeah.
I don't let those things roll off me. They don't bother me. They encourage me to be better.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So there's a reality of an event, and then there's a personality that you build around that event. And so if you have been a victim of a crime and you live your life as though you are as though the crime is still affecting you and you don't evolve to heal from that, are you doing yourself a disadvantage? I mean, I would say yes, we do have. That's why we have treatment for trauma or crime or victimhood, is so that you can move, you can develop and heal beyond the trauma. So yes, I don't think it's advantageous at all to live your life as a victim. But I will say the beauty of you, Angelo, is that you do reference points of your life when you were disadvantaged or you were a victim. So
and that made me better. No, I'm never going to make an excuse for being a victim.
No. I'm
it's
just
going to drive me to do greater things.
And I think that is the positive side of having a life experience versus a negative side, but still the experience was real for you. You evolved beyond it, and some people get stuck in it. I feel, I am in a profession that works to help people overcome their stuckness or their suffering. So I commend you, but it's still a reference point for you. So it's still meaningful. It's just that.
The other thing that you brought up was the word patriarchy. If there is a patriarchy, and I don't know any constitutional right that I as a male have that a female doesn't have. But let's get back to the word patriarchy. If there is a patriarchy, the one who suffers the most is, I'm broadly going to give Angelo's statistic. It's the top 20% of the men, they're getting things done. The bottom half of the men that aren't getting dates, that aren't getting the skill acquisition to have a level of control in their life, to make money, to have a sense of purpose, to be a leader, they're the ones suffering the most, the bottom percentage of men, and it's no one's fault but their own. They have to become the best version of themselves.
So I 100% agree that there is a small number of men who benefit from who benefit from patriarchy, and the rest of us suffer, let's just say. But that's even an ironic statement as well, because following my logic, anybody who is living in a world of dominance, which is self-interest over group interest, right? Mutual reciprocity, is suffering. They're suffering based on having material good and dominance over others, and their emotional state is unhealthy, is not right. But
It is.
It is.
I mean, I didn't know that. Boy, I guess I'm really suffering.
So yeah, so I think we just read an article by Shayla Locklear, who talks about the emotional poverty that comes with wealth and abundance. There's a purpose poverty, that you have so many things you lose sight of your purpose. And so that deficit in purpose and that decline in relevance to the world is an emotional crisis for people. So people who have a lot of power and wealth might also have a depleted emotional state.
I mean, maybe this applies broadly to everyone, but younger men, I'll probably give you this message as someone who's been there and done that. No one really cares about you, to be honest with you, and except for your mother, and no one is coming to save you. It's on you. There is a burden, and a burden of performance. And I lived through it. I've succeeded, failed at it. I don't give up. I'm persistent, and I enjoy it. That gives me a sense of purpose. It makes me strive. It makes me get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and it makes me fulfill what I deem to be my purpose in my life from my perspective. I guess I can't throw that on anyone. But if you're a younger male in today's world and you think that someone is coming to save you, shame on you. Get up there and be the best version of yourself. And if I had to list 3 things that I think are really bringing, and I can only relate to being a male, younger men down: porn, gaming, and weed. There are some people that can navigate gaming and weed to an extent. I don't know. I'm not really that interested in either. But those are 3 detriments that I think take the edge, take a sense of purpose, take a sense of getting things done, getting up at 5 o'clock, working out, acquiring skills. These are things that are very, very important to me. And if these are antiquated way of doing things from hundreds of years ago, well, I don't know. It worked pretty well. The world went from lesser people to 9 billion people to skyscrapers to landing on a moon to incredible things that we did.
Is there a question in that, or do you just want me to respond? I mean,
you could respond. It's up to you.
I mean, I'll just bring it back again. It seems a little bit heady, but so let me bring it back to an example. I was working with a beautiful family, and they called me, and their son was failing to launch, was what they had called it. They had predetermined that their son had was failing to launch. He was 22 in the basement, smoking weed, gaming, and whatever the other things you were saying.
It sounds a little stereotypical, but yes.
But it is what's happening. And so they came to me and they said, we're afraid that he's failing to launch. And they were worried about him. And I think that worry, was also weighing on him, because he really was depressed and he couldn't really get out of his own way, psychologically, or his, the biochemistry of his brain was actually underperforming. He couldn't develop his own agency. Anyway, I guess the first thing I really wanted to do was work with the parents and help them rethink what they were seeing. That in fact, when kids come home and they're lost in the world, home is not a trap. Home should be perceived as a respite, as a refuge. And when people come back to their home, they should be surrounded by people who are encouraging them and supporting them and giving them more tarmac to find their way, not feel that being home is the problem. being in the world felt like a problem to them. And so I think when we start trying to label or put diagnoses on people, we have to really be thoughtful that we're not buying into the system that put them there. Right. And so anyway, I guess, Angela, we can move forward behaviorally from being unproductive to productive. But we also have an emotional layer. Like you've learned, when you've learned how to have agency, but you might not have relearned how to have relationships after suffering, after a deprivation, or after a challenging life or experience. And so there are things that while you can behaviorally take control of your life, you still really have challenges in your emotional state. You have maybe some self-talk, or you have confidence or self-esteem issues, or you get triggered. And so I think the place that I'm talking is that people, while they might be performing well or not well in the world, need to take some time to work through their schema and their personas and the meaning that they gave to their experiences, because those meanings can become repetitive and get people stuck from moving forward. And so I think that's the space of the relational work that families really don't have a lot of access to. They have portfolio management and asset allocation and trusts and estates and agreements. They have governance and family council, and they have certain tools that manage the family, the way the family organizes. But beneath those things is an emotional current, an invisible emotional current. And there aren't a lot of resources in the family office, in the high net worth family space,
I agree with you,
that addresses those dynamics. We can have mechanisms for the wealth and mechanisms for the family, how the family organizes. But still, there's so many emotional things that are happening in that space. How do you make decisions about how you distribute wealth? And what are the consequences, intentional or not? And what is happening in the governance space? I mean, you might have good governance set up, but you have three brothers who are constantly overriding, the sister who has a different opinion. So there are those dynamics that need this relational context. And the book is also talking about, the theory in the book is also introducing something to family offices and family governance, which is called the relational code of conduct. And that really looks at how to apply the four core differentiators that will help families achieve family harmony, family satisfaction, interpersonal relationships that are rewarding, mutually rewarding. And so I guess all of that leads to the challenges, the interpersonal challenges that we're facing are not the natural order of things. We are actually built for connection. And so when we are guided in that direction, we can achieve it.
Stacy. I think that was wonderful. I completely agree from my perspective, being active with families in the family business. And by the way, audience, 48 minutes in, by the way, welcome. And our special guest today, we decided to do it in a little different format, is Dr. Stacy Feiner, CEO of Feiner Enterprises. My title, I may have to adapt this in the video, but was From Dysfunction to High Function, Rewiring Family Business Dynamics. Dr. Feiner is very well known and regarded in the community. She's been in it for decades. She does have the skill acquisition, as well as the capacity of putting her thoughts into being of incredible value to families, family offices, and family enterprises. I am a fan of her work. Obviously, if you watch the first 48 minutes, there are some things that we have a different perspective on. And audience, that's okay. Like no one else in the family office community is having these kind of discussions. And kudos to Stacy, not because I'm such a high intellect and a great debater, but she came on being willing to have a free-flowing conversation without being overly scripted. And obviously, I think most of you are going to agree that on varying points, and some of it may be your perspective, that it was an a conversation that hopefully causes you to think and opens up your mind. And I am not afraid to tackle these tough subjects, even though they probably don't do me any favors relative to my core business and what I'm looking to do. So, one, I appreciate you, Stacy. Why don't, in the final 20, 25 minutes of a little bit more of the classic part of our interview, I got a couple of questions I would like to ask you. If you only had 1 hour, and I know that's unfair, but if you only had 1 hour with the family in dysfunction, what would you do first?
Well, since I have been doing this for a long time, and I do always have a first hour with a client that I'm working with, a family that I'm working with, I do have an answer. I mean, I think, all of the obvious things is the discovery and the exploration and the goals and what's getting in the way. But I think in my mind, what I'm trying to extract and so I can have important material that I can then grapple with families on. I'm listening for, no surprise, relational dynamics. And when I'm asking questions or when they're speaking about what, the impetus, what brought them into the conversation, here's probably what I'm doing. I'm looking for what the internal tension is. I'm trying to find what the root cause of the tension is, because everything oriented towards growth requires some tension. Then I'm listening for what's the cognitive process? What assumptions are they making? And where are the flawed assumptions? So oftentimes, just this interrupting myself, I might interrupt a client from a family member from talking from beginning to end on a point that they're trying to make, because I hear early on a contradiction in their thought. So even if they take me to the very end of the story, I already know that it's a flawed outcome or a flawed conclusion, because I can hear a contradiction in their own thinking. So I might begin to show a client how they might be saying that they want something, but they're doing something else that is interrupting them getting what they want. So that's kind of the challenging assumptions. And then I might move to this notion of introspection, more the meaning and the emotion, oftentimes the fear. So in that sense, I'm looking at fears and at concerns and at really, I'm listening for how they are not trusting their own intuition. So they might have a lot of the answers in what they're saying to their own initial problem that they've come in with. And I'm listening for how they might have it, but don't listen to it, right? They're not listening to their own intuition. So part of the growth process, right, is to challenge assumptions so they have new thinking, but also to reverse fears so that they can begin to trust their own interpretation, to use themselves as a reference point, to trust their gut, essentially. That's the thinking and the feeling and the behaving. So that's kind of the psychology of it, because psychology has behavior, emotion, and thought. Then we're into the next 3 steps, which is self-awareness. So we're taking this stuff that I've just helped them interpret, and I'm taking my own copious notes so I can go back to it. Then we're going to self-awareness. How do we apply these understandings, these new ways of thinking, to self-awareness so that people can actually move out of their stuckness and bring in a new perspective and a new set of perceptions and new ways of thinking and problem solving? Then we go into alignment. Now we're saying, okay, what are your goals and how do we align them with what you want, making sure that your ambition is also your ability. So sometimes people come in with an ambition that is not, they don't have an ability for, and they're going to always be spinning their wheels. So we need to reconcile some of those things in alignment so that we can put them on a path for peak performance. And that's the 6th level, or the 6th, not the 6th level, that's the 6th stage or phase, which is peak performance. So we go from internal conflict through the 4 steps and then to peak performance. And by the way, this happens again and again and again. These are the phases of growth. So every time you're looking to grow and you have this internal tension, you'll go through this process. It's brilliant. I love it. It works every time.
Why do successful families all too commonly avoid addressing? I'm not going to use the word soft. I think they're the hard stuff, but these family dynamics until, of course, they implode. Why?
One reason is a little bit, our fault, is that if there was an answer, wouldn't they have it already? Like if we, the experts, as you say, the advisors, the consultants, the people outside their family, if we had the solution, wouldn't we bring it to them? And they feel as though they've asked for these solutions and they haven't been able to find them. So I think some families have asked for help, and they're not getting the help that they need to solve these problems, and so they have this belief that there's not a solution out there, and they've given up. But I think that's, again, a more kind of cognitive or practical way of looking at it. The psychological thing is that there's such a thing as called homeostasis, right? Our bodies come back to what's our temperature? 96.8 degrees. I mean, systems come back to a stable state. And families are a system, and they're no different. Because it's so complex, families end up coming back to a place of homeostasis. And that is typically what they're familiar with, behaviors and problems that they've become accustomed to, that they have collectively, they have not figured out how to change. So there's a collective component to this. And a lot of families are not practiced in that collective change element. And then the last thing I'll say is, there is such a thing as growth, but we don't really know what it includes. So when you say I've grown, what does that mean? It means that you have created a new homeostasis for yourself. You've created a new baseline, and you need to orient yourself to that new baseline. And that takes a number of practice, attempts at practice. Like you don't learn something right away, you have to practice it. So it takes practice.
And I think we covered some of these subjects more than enough a little bit earlier, but bringing it into the confines of what we're talking about, what role does birth order, gender, or family mythology, how about that word, play in creating internal power struggles?
Well, well, birth order is a really interesting, so it's a little bit of nurture nature here. I think what we could just kind of round it up to, there are some nature things that happen in birth order and gender dynamics. I mean, we did talk about the external factors, right? Mm-hmm. The system that we live in that impacts gender dynamics and probably birth order too. And family mythology. So I would say some of it is nature and awareness. When we have awareness, we can change nature, right? We can pay attention to those things and shift some of those habits, tendencies, preferences, traits, and attributes. But that's not what your question is. Your question is, how does that impact? Let's just say it does impact for all of the reasons that we've talked about. But also, let me just think of this too. I mean, birth order too, we have this rule that, the oldest child, gets these things, and then the middle child gets these things, and the preference for definitely. It definitely impacts power struggles. And that's exactly why when families are having challenges, it's good to have a resource to reshape those relationships and redefine them and reshape them. And it's possible. And when it happens, it's a beautiful experience for families to reshape those relationships.
What's the biggest mistake that patriarchs and matriarchs, and maybe it's different for each one, generally make when, I don't know if I like this phrasing, but handing over power, control?
Well, I think the biggest mistake is, maybe it's three. It's the patriarch and matriarch assuming that the next generation wants it, putting pressure on them, making assumptions that they want it. Maybe the other is that the next generation makes some assumptions that they want it or they're ready for it. And that also, I would say that somehow there's a big confusion between ownership and employment. And when those two things get confused, and I guess employment, if it were a family business or if you were, paid to be on your family board and it was a specific responsibility or role. So, confusing shareholder responsibilities with paid positions. And I guess the last one I might say is a big error is, of course, not bringing the family together to make collective decisions, right? Not having this.
Which is the heart of governance, I guess, how decisions are made.
Governance, yeah.
What are warning signs? How about that? What are warning signs that family meetings are performative theater?
What are warning signs? Conversations in the boardroom or discussions that are had by one person and are not, you have people who are not speaking up. You have people who are disengaged. You have people who are dominating conversations. There's a intimidation factor. People are, and there's contradictions. Patriarch or matriarch says everybody's opinions matter, and then only a couple of opinions matter. I guess those are the problems that arise. What are the indicators? Conflict and disengagement.
Okay, so related to that, how do you design conflict resolution processes that don't suppress disagreement?
Well, I'll go back to this point that I want to make around the relational code of conduct. I think that when you create the conditions, so I mean, we could just look at just general leadership. There's leadership that is inclusive, that does regard personal agency and personal development and learning and making mistakes and mentorship and engagement. We know that there are leadership styles, parenting styles that enhance family harmony or family stability, and there are behaviors that shun that kind of collective contribution. And so I think the four core differentiators, when you think about the relational code of conduct, is that you first assess your relationships based on, are they mutually rewarding? Is there an imbalance in relationships? Are relationships feeling that they're more rewarding for one and falling short for another? So I think that's a benchmark. A benchmark is ingenuity. How often do we start conversations by saying this is how it's been done without changing precedent, without creating new rules or new decision making as new members come in? Are we taking in the advice or are we leaving the in-laws out, or are we bringing them in? Are we leaving one generation or one family branch out, or are we bringing them in? So are we making decisions that serve the interests of many versus serving the interests of just the decision maker? That often happens on boards.
Of course, but maybe a follow-up on that.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear you, trust me. We're effectively on the same page. But let's assume a family has 60, 70 different family members. They have a board, they have 2 or 3 different committees. They, in my opinion, committees and boards should be 3 people, but I'm open to varying opinions on that. I think once you get above that, you get sides, you get groupthink. And I just don't think, from my experiences, including having my own investing family office and having been through committees and boards and been on some for families, I think when they're bigger, it often is rarely good. I hear you. I want to listen to the family members. I want to take in varying opinions. I want to be careful about anchoring. But at the end of the day, I don't think, I mean, I guess you could say a democratic process, all 60 of us vote. Isn't it more effective to have a more streamlined governance and decision-making process with a more limited number of people, yet still valuing the inputs of everyone?
Yes. Yes.
Man, we're agreeing too much lately, Stacy.
Yes. No, I think again, so we have these mechanisms, we make decisions. So, but it's so interesting. I mean, we could, we look at the portfolio of investments, right? We could say that we just want to make money. So we don't care what companies we invest in, whether they're oil spillages or they're, whatever the companies are that are not conducive to the earth or to the planet, or they're not taking into consideration their employees, or and then you get to the family and you say, okay, what's important in terms of our portfolio? So you get input from the family, and then you make decisions, from a decision-making perspective. And you do that with family governance as well. I mean, first you have to understand how are the individual needs being understood? And, again, Rich Walkowitz and I wrote an article about the me and the we. How do you develop the individuals so that they are also aligned with the we? How do you make sure that you're developing individuals and their own agency? And then how do we make sure that they are also, that the we, the unifying factor is also sufficient and healthy and growing as well? These things don't have to be in competition. And I guess maybe that's what we're really talking about. How do you reduce competition and increase collaboration? And then when those systems are in place, then the governing systems or the decision-making systems can function to serve the needs of many. So I think it's a layered approach, Angelo.
I mean, sure. I mean, again, I effectively agree. Yeah, there's nuances there, but in the essence of time, do you believe that some families taking it too far, and I've definitely seen this, I could argue, have too many antiquated systems, have too many rules, have too many, what effectively leads to bureaucracy, and too many steps in the way of making decisions and having clarity of a sense of purpose and moving forward? In other words, could families overdo both systems and governance?
Sure, absolutely. You can get so rigid and
Right.
so concerned with process that you don't, with procedure, that you don't consider, process or discovery. I think one of the things about the relational code of conduct that I think is valuable, and I think you can apply this to other mechanisms for keeping families healthy, is, do a family assessment, which, obviously I have a tool for that, but also to do an audit, to look at maybe the 4 or 5 categories that you have that organize the family decision making, and you do an audit. How are we doing on the people? Let's look at our processes, let's look at our pro forma, let's look at our vision, and let's look at what we want for the next generation or subsequent generations. I think sometimes when you make decisions, not saying what do we want, but we're working for generations that have not yet been born, that's our boss, not the patriarch or the matriarch or the founders of a company or the founders of wealth, which we often base our decisions, what would they want, what's their legacy. But I think decisions that we're talking about right now could be and should be considered in terms of what's the impact of our decision on 2 or 3 generations out. And I think when you start using those kinds of decision making and auditing your processes based on what the future needs, you have a better chance of evolving with the times and evolving with the needs of the many, even though you have to have efficiency in making decisions with, with your products and services, your assets and your wealth.
I believe my last question, somewhat a little philosophical, uh, and I heard it from somewhere, so I'm not saying I created it, but without a unifying morality, I think societies fall apart. Let me change that to a family. Without a unifying morality, do family offices fall apart?
Yeah, I think if I didn't say that, I'm thinking back, a shared vision, um, shared expectations, shared morality and values. I mean, I do think that that's what the sixth level is a way of organizing the needs and expectations of the individual and making sure that they're mapped to the greater good. And the greater good also has to evolve. I mean, it has to have its own preservation. Um, and it also has to evolve based on the needs of the many, which, yeah.
Okay. Uh, why don't I give, as we had a very unique conversation, again, I could probably honestly say, I don't know if there's really ever been a longer form conversation around some of the topics we went down in the family office community. So, mainly kudos to my great guest, Dr. Stacy Feiner, for the incredible thought leadership and willingness to, I'll go with the word to spar over what could be some sensitive subjects. You may have to pardon me, Stacy. I may have to use some clickbaity titles to help us even get some extra views, because I think we both had some interesting discussion points that will effectively cause the audience, I hope, to think for themselves. Why don't you share with the audience maybe a final thought or two? And please, I'd like to hear the name of your book or books again. And how could families also learn more, connect with you, and reach out?
Well, I really want to say thank you, Angela. We've known each other for a couple of years, and every time we've talked, it's always been engaging and exciting. And I find the conversations with you stimulating. And I know sometimes you want to warn me that it's going to be tough or whatever. I just find this delightful. I find you delightful, and I find it really stimulating and intellectually thoughtful. And I learn a lot from you. So I want to thank you for having me today and just for being my friend and supporting me. And I certainly want to support you. And I love the new endeavors that you're getting involved in. And I think your podcasts and your videos are great. And I share them a lot.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Again, the book is The Sixth Level, and you can just type in the6level.com. It's all spelled out, SIX. It's the sixth level.com. My website is stacyfeiner.com. And I have a first book that's called Talent Mindset, The Business Owner's Guide to Building Bench Strength, which I really think is a really good how-to book for business owners who are trying to build a complete talent management system. I think that was everything. How to find me, what my books are, and how much I appreciate you and I admire you.
Well, you're very kind. Dr. Stacy Feiner, everyone, CEO of Feiner Enterprises. I've been a fan for years. We connected here and there over the years. I follow her LinkedIn post and her wonderful book and all that. And this is great to finally have her on my platform, for her to have the guts to come on to what sometimes can be a little bit of a combative environment. And I probably lose more people than I gain from some of my thoughts. But again, I enjoy. Some of you want to call me the Darth Vader of the family office world. Well, in the end, he did have a good heart after all. And again, I want you all just to don't accept the status quo, to learn from others, to acquire the skills, and effectively to think for yourself. Some things are kind of black and white, I guess, mathematics, and other things, they are gray. There's perspectives that we have for a variety of reasons that may lead us down our own road that we have to travel. So those of you that are not as familiar with me, I'm Angelo Robles. I've been in the family office community for many a decade. I've been an entrepreneur in the community, a wealth creator, certainly an investor, sometimes a really bad one, but hopefully getting better as I age. I know what it's like to create a family office, to have family dynamics in the way that Stacy and I spoke about today, and living through the things that I talk about. And again, definitely not vanilla, I hope, and willing to bring challenging subjects to the table. My personal favorites really are creating a family office and structuring, geopolitical, macroeconomics, investing. And I don't know how I went, Stacy, near an hour and a half and did not bring up AI once. I have
and we love that topic.
I have some people that are clapping. Angelo, finally, you went more than 2 minutes and didn't bring it up. So yes, I do believe AI will be the control layer for everything, but many of you heard many of my thoughts on that in my prior videos, on my website, the masterclass that I teach. So if you're not familiar, follow me on LinkedIn, on @FamilyOffice on YouTube, and my website is angelorobles.com. And learn about what I'm doing, including my AI Family Office Masterclass this June in New York, but there'll definitely be others to come. And again, I said this before, I get it. I'm not always the most likable character in the community. And why do you really care? It's really less about likability and more so about providing value, creating discussion. And I go back to, again, what Michael Saylor said on my podcast, and it stuck with me. After all those years and money decades ago in MIT, the capability of learning to think for yourself was the most valuable thing that he acquired in MIT. So I tell everyone to think for themselves. And again, I'd like to thank our special guest today. You absolutely have to follow her. Let's thank her. I will be doing multiple, probably clickbaity clips on this, as well as the long form interview. And I really appreciate her. Again, Dr. Stacy Feiner, thank you for being a great guest today.
Oh, super. Thank you, Angelo. It was a pleasure to be here. Thanks for being a great host.
You're very kind. My pleasure. Thank you.